combat, different theaters, the peace dividend, the rest of it. Looking at what's been going on in Ukraine for over 2 years now, what are the most salient lessons for NATO, for the U.S. Military overall, for a kind of near-peer conflict that we may see threatened in Europe once again? What are the greatest lessons here?
Yeah, so I think the first lesson is you either win up front, fast and big, or you're in a long fight. So step one is to develop high-end capabilities and capacity at a high level of readiness so that you can win the first fight out of the starting blocks. Because what we see in Ukraine is if you don't, and you're facing a large adversary like Russia, you're going to end up in a long, protracted fight. And that fight requires a second feature, which is depth. Depth of personnel, reserves, systems to mobilize, extra equipment, munitions in sufficient stockpiles, industrial capacity that's ready to be activated or already activated to go. So win up front, but be ready to win long. That's the first lesson. I think the second lesson, you get down into tactical lessons pretty quickly, but we do see that drone warfare is sort of democratizing the third dimension. Just about everybody on the battlefield can get something into the air now and affect you from the air. That's something we're going to have to wrestle with. We're still seeing it play out on both sides in Ukraine. How much, how capably. It's easy to overstate it. It's easy to overstate these things. But nevertheless, I think use of the third dimension is not new, but being so widespread and proliferated throughout the ranks and the formations, I think that's something new we'll have to deal with. There are tons of other things to look at, but I think one of the most important ones for 32 democracies to look at is the importance of civil-military relations in this fight. And we've seen it play out in both sides. When civilian leadership is good and strong, it can galvanize the nation, and when it interacts in a positive and constructive fashion with military leadership, it produces results on the battlefield. And we should always remember that. It's one of our greatest strengths inside the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and it's one of the greatest gifts we can cherish and nurture for generations to come.
Thank you. Before I ask my last question, let me remind you of the microphone. If you would like to ask a question, please line up over there behind the standing microphone, and we'll take it from there. Last question, General. China is supporting, helping, enabling, we can call it any way we want, what Russia has been doing in Ukraine. The same goes for Iran. The same goes for North Korea. I once called it the axis of dictatorships that's aligned itself against democracies. What lessons for the alliance would you draw from that? Because you're not really dealing just with the Russia problem set. You're also looking at this wider alliance against us. Even though I understand that Secretary General does not talk of China as an adversary, we are avoiding that description. But how do we respond to that? How does the alliance prepare against that kind of alignment against us?
Sure. So, yeah, a little bit controversial if we start at the right end of the spectrum of conflict, right? But if we start at the left end of the spectrum of conflict, pre-conflict activities, we discover that NATO, a geographically defined alliance, does have China challenges inside it right now. So our resilience to those challenges, our ability to protect our strategic infrastructure, our ability to protect the intellectual property of our principal military systems, all of that, those are going to be our ability to protect our data. These are all going to be very important things for us to harden ourselves against and to be resilient against, because we can already see those challenges inside the European geography today.
And do we need to change our mindset also? You spoke about munitions. We used to live through this, just-in-time delivery systems during those 30 years. You spoke of the need to stockpile, to have reserves, to have redundancies in the system. Is this working itself through the alliance? Are we really understanding how profoundly the world has changed?
Sure it is. I think there are two pieces of evidence for that. One, objectively, is that we are changing the stockpile requirements that we require. So we have in our plans requirements for a certain amount of stockages of various different things that you need to fight a war with. We're changing those. We're revising those upwards. I think everybody would be doing that nationally anyway, but we as an alliance are doing that. The second is with regard to personnel. A number of nations in the alliance have elected to return to some form of conscription, some form of obligatory service. A number of other ones are considering it. And in fact, I think as we look ahead, I think manpower is going to be one of the biggest strategic challenges that we face as an alliance, and we're going to have to come to grips with that. Our human resources have to be built up and have to be accessible in the same way that industrial resources and production and war stocks are.
Okay, let me pause here now, turn over to the audience for question. If you would like to ask a question, please line up at the mic. Please identify yourself and pose your question, please.
Okay, thank you very much. General, thanks for joining us today. Jeff Mankoff with National Defense University. You talked a lot about the steps that NATO's taken for territorial defense and deterrence. As we know, the most vulnerable places and the most likely triggers for a conflict are countries that are not in NATO. Countries like not just Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, and others. Could you say something about the steps that NATO has taken in order to defer and deter aggression against these countries and better prepare them, and what you think still needs to be done?
Sure. Yeah, that's a fantastic question, because the alliance exists for the alliance, right? The alliance exists to defend the other members of the alliance, but we don't exist in a vacuum, and we need friends and partners as well as allies. And we have a partnership program in the alliance. We designate partners in the alliance. Allied Command Operations has more than 30 active partnerships right now, formally recognized by NATO and by the nation making that partnership. Georgia and Moldova are both partner nations formally designated. Some of them participate in what we call the force pool, which means they make themselves available for some of our operations, such as KFOR. There are several non-allies operating in KFOR right now. In Georgia, in particular, NATO has had an office and a robust training and interoperability campaign for some years, for about a dozen years, and that continues today. In Moldova, nations bilaterally have a lot going on, and NATO has a small office there as well. We adjust the level of effort as we look around the world. Those certainly aren't the only two partners we have, but we spend a lot of time looking at it. I think it's an important point to note that many nations that have previously or historically been considered geographically influenced by Russia are looking westward right now and are looking to establish new security partners and to shed themselves of older, less reliable security partners. And that's something we spend a lot of time thinking about as well.
Okay, ma'am.
Hello, I'm Liis Muir. I'm the defense counselor at the Estonian Embassy. And may I first say, I think I speak for many people on the eastern flank that we are really appreciative and grateful for your work. I think especially with the regional plans, this is really great stuff. My question actually is for you more than as the head of EUCOM rather than Sakur. What would the implications, in your view, be to the U.S. Force posture in Europe from these new regional defense plans and also the new minimum military requirements, considering the composition of forces, how they are rotated, but also the geographical footprint of the American forces in Europe? Thank you so much.
Thanks. And first of all, let me thank Estonia for everything you do for the alliance. Not just in terms of thought leadership, but also in terms of innovative approaches to national defense and your approaches to mobilizing not just your military, but your society in its own defense. Your devotion to Article 3, something that comes before Article 5, that's impressive indeed. So my congratulations to Estonia, my gratitude. We have to divide the question into two parts, ma'am, I think, right? The first question is, what is the requirement? How much is required? The U.S. will always provide what is required of the U.S. for those parts. There is strong policy behind this. It's bipartisan. It's always been there. We will provide what we are supposed to provide. Right now, I don't think it's really public information, but the United States has, under our force sourcing construct for the regional plans, the United States has pledged at various levels of attachment more force than it has in decades to the regional plans. So I'm very confident about the United States' commitment to these plans, to their executability, not just their executability, but to their rapid success. I'm very confident in that. How the U.S. does it, whether it does it with rotational forces, permanent forces, that's a much more complex interplay of budget, availability of forces, readiness requirements, other global requirements, frankly, domestic political requirements. So all of that comes together, and a lot of that's outside of my sandbox.
We have time for one more question. Please, sir.
Thanks. I'm Matt McKeag with MITRE. Sir, you've spoken quite a bit about the need for U.S. and NATO to be able to counter Russian mass on the ground. Can you also talk about how you see, with the new members of NATO and possibly following on the previous question, the interplay between air forces and the ability of the air to counter ground mass and momentum through traditional roles like close air support and things like that across a full NATO force? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So NATO's air forces are a great and growing success story in my mind, right? They're well-trained, they're well-equipped, and where they're not well-equipped, they're planning on becoming well-equipped. So we are rapidly moving into 4th generation plus and 5th generation exclusively across the alliance. So the Saab Gripen, of course, very high-end aircraft, the French Rafale, very, very high-end aircraft, and the F-35, well-known, a multinational platform that's now proliferating. By 2030, there are going to be more than 600 F-35s in the alliance in Europe. As you know, every plane you add to a 5th generation network is worth more than just one airframe, right? Because you increase the size of the network of sensors and everything that's operating. And our ability to move beyond that platform specificity and to wrap the other high-end platforms together with Saab and with the French Rafale, our ability to do that is going to just increase even more greatly. So I'm very, very confident about our ability to wage high-end warfare. General Scorch Hecker, who commands NATO Air Command, and his deputy Johnny Stringer, Air Marshal Johnny Stringer, are extremely active. They have a very strong, very realistic training program that focuses on all the high-end threats that we have today. Of course, focusing on the exquisite end of aerial combat means you're probably not able to focus as much on close air support and things like that. And that's something we're wrestling with inside the alliance. The good news is that the alliance does retain a huge number of 4th generation aircraft, so we still have the capabilities to do it, and we're looking through the ways that you maintain both capabilities going far into the future. I hope that answered your question, sir.
Well, thank you very much. We're about out of time. So first of all, I'd like to thank General Cavalli. Chris,
thank you. Great.
Thank you for being here with us and for this really insightful discussion of how dramatically the alliance has evolved in a positive direction. Let's emphasize
Absolutely.
that. Even though there is a lot of work to be done. We very much look forward to welcoming you again to the Atlantic Council. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us in person. Greatly appreciate your attention. I hope this was a useful discussion for all of you. Thank you on behalf of the Atlantic Council.
Thanks, Andrew.